Hey, everybody out there. We have with us two guests, familiar faces. Mark Collinsworth of Vera Global Financial Wealth Management, a finance guy who keeps his eye on global affairs and how it affects the economy and world events. And also Brian Thomas, most recently with the AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C., a long career in news. And guys, today's topic is the leak from the Supreme Court about what decision they're going to be making on Roe versus Wade and the implications of that. Now, the internet and all the networks have been sizzling with comments on this back and forth, what it means, what an egregious offense it was, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Brian, I know, why don't we start with you, because I know you have some very strong feelings about this. Brian Thomas.
Well, there shouldn't be any surprise in this. I mean, the Federalist Society has been packing the court now for years, and they finally got three more under Trump to finish this thing off. And I think it's just a matter of how it's worded and whether any of the squawking that goes on between now and the time that the decision is finally released has any effect on the justices. My suspicion is it won't, and that this sort of thing was not a surprise, and that if you think it was, just wait for other decisions from this court and you'll see what I mean.
All right, let's take a look at the Federalist Society and who they've managed to get on the Supreme Court. Now, over my shoulder here, we have John Roberts, who's also a link with the Federalist Society. We have, of course, Clarence Thomas, Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett, and also Brett Kavanaugh. And Brian, you make the case that the Federalist Society has been steering these people onto the Supreme Court with ill effect for the nation, correct?
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. And if you look at what the court has decided to get involved with, just in the past 5 years, the number of cases that it decided to hear versus the overall bent of the court tilts you only to the right. And I don't know how anyone could be surprised by this. My suspicion is that it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Mark Collinsworth, you don't see it that way. You don't see this as very damaging to the nation or the Supreme Court.
Correct, I don't. And the reason why is because, Roe technically, it went to the Supreme Court as an abortion issue, but it actually left the court as a privacy matter. If you read the actual official ruling on it, the actual court said that a woman has a constitutional right to privacy if she gets an abortion. And even Ruth Ginsburg said that the Roe had nothing to do with reproductive rights. So I kind of think in that if you do overturn Roe, which I don't see how you really can, because technically it's not a law, the Supreme Court doesn't write laws, it's just going to simply return the power of the decision to the states to write their own laws.
Well, how did it become the law of the land, making abortion illegal throughout all of the United States if it was merely about privacy? How did that come about?
Well, what actually happened is after it went through the Supreme Court and they basically ruled it was a privacy matter, the Chief Justice at that time, I think Rehnquist, if I pronounced the name correctly, he actually went to the government and said, you guys have got to actually write a law because the Supreme Court doesn't write laws. We can only deal with, interpreting federal laws if they're constitutional or not. But back in the 1970s, there was no way that you could get enough votes to actually make it into a law. But they did pass the Hyde Amendment, which is actually said that, abortions cannot go beyond 20 weeks and there can be no federal funding for it. Ever since then, your government agencies have sat back very patiently. Your state governments have waited very patiently, because up until now, we've had a 4 conservatives, 4 liberals, and 1 swing vote. If the state governments knew if they started passing laws on abortion and it went back to the Supreme Court and that swing vote went against them, they would totally have their legs kicked out from under them. And so now here in the last year, you've seen all these states starting to pass laws because now they have a very comfortable six conservatives. So if they lose one, it doesn't matter. And of course, you have those 5 are very anti-abortion. So I think they just waited for the perfect time to actually jump into this.
So actually, just to make it clear to some of our viewers that may not be abreast of all of this, this decision, if it holds up, this was merely a draft, but if they do come down with that ruling, it doesn't outlaw abortion. It merely brings it back to the states to decide. Correct?
That is
true.
correct.
Yeah.
And Brian, you take a lot of umbrage at that. How come?
Well, look, I think that reproductive rights for women should not be decided by a batch of old men, old white men, who don't have any stake in this game at all, in terms of what's going on with women in their lives. They're abstract, they're distant, and it's just something that should be a woman's decision, period. It's her body, it's her decision, and the decision of her family and her mate. And the minute you start trolling for votes with this, which is what the Republican Party is doing here, don't kid yourself. This is simply to energize the base to turn out, especially for this off-year election, on the chance that they can completely upend the Biden administration and turn it into a nothing presidency. This is exactly what's going on.
The Republicans are saying the reason this week was engineered is because they want to affect the midterm elections by rallying the liberal Democratic base. So, that was kind of like manipulation, was it not?
Well, look, nothing is more manipulative than a court that has secrecy as its hallmark. If we're going to have a government by the people, for the people, and of the people, then secrecy should take a back seat to all of this. And the fact that the court makes all of its decisions quietly until they're announced kind of flies in the face of all of that.
Well, when you say secrecy, I mean, you object to the decisions, the pending decisions, the draft matters being kept secret until the final decision is made public, the final ruling?
I'm saying this, that courts at the lower level, at the federal level, never make announcements about the decision-making process before they're announced. I understand that.
Right.
But when you get to the Supreme Court, I think this is a time when transparency might actually be of benefit. So you can understand how the justices are going through their machinations, and more importantly, what arguments are being made pro and con on any given issue.
Well, the contrary argument about it being a woman's decision, it's her body. The contrary argument is, a classic argument among conservatives, is that you're talking about the life of a human being. And so therefore, it's not solely a woman's decision to decide if she could terminate or, quote, murder another human being within her womb.
That's the whole premise of the right side argument there, is that they use this issue of conception begins life, and we can't get away from that. And we all know that that's not possible. No fetus can survive from the moment of conception until it reaches a point of gestation to allow that fetus to survive on its own without being in the mother's womb. So to say that life begins at the moment of conception is just another silly argument by the far right to make their case for votes.
Well, how some of these laws that they'd like to apply where they could terminate a fetus even after 3 months or later, or even up to the point of live birth. I mean, doesn't that affect whether or not it's a human being? I mean, isn't it sentient? Further along in the presidency, doesn't it feel pain? Isn't it a mostly formed human being, even though there may not be at the point of birth, but close to it?
Well, I don't know if any fetuses that would ever tell me that. Do you?
Well, I mean, I don't think that argument is really valid, because of course a fetus can't tell you that. But what I'm saying is, if it's 3, 4, 5 months down the road or later, then they're forming as full bodies. They feel pain, and it's a human being in there. That's the argument.
Mark, your turn.
Well, yeah. I just this is one thing about the left. They always talk about, let's follow the science. Well, back in the 70s when they did the science, they detected the heartbeat at 20 weeks, and that's why the cutoff was assigned to 20 weeks. Now that technology has advanced, now the heartbeat is detected at 12 weeks. it actually the fetus can react to stimuli at 14 weeks. So if you want to really follow the science, then technically by the original definition of the 20 weeks, that's all been pulled back to a 12 to 13 week window now. And that's what a lot of your state governments are doing, like Texas and Missouri, or Mississippi, I mean, that are resetting their laws to basically follow the original guidelines on heartbeats and stimuli.
I think your point earlier, Mark, was correct. If they didn't sense that this court was going to lower the boom on Roe versus Wade, none of these legislatures would have taken any action to change these abortion laws and tighten them to the point where they are now. I think you're absolutely right. They smelled blood, and this is pretty easy to predict.
And this is also, I think, is going to lead to a problem. Even though I'm not a big proponent of abortion, I do believe that they have allowed this to go so long now. You've set a precedent that you really can't reverse. And you now, by giving that, not fixing the problem 40 years ago, and now letting all the states try to fix a problem that the Supreme Court created, you're now going to have to, I think there's 26 states that are going to totally ban abortion altogether. I can just see this just steamrolling into a huge problem over the next several years.
Yeah, so, it may not be resolved even with a ruling where it's going to be challenged in court. Also, there's already talk about, including by Schumer, that they will codify this. In other words, Congress will pass a law making it permissible throughout the land, and that in itself will end up perhaps before the Supreme Court as a constitutional challenge, correct?
I don't think there's any doubt about that. The Democrats aren't going to give up on this. They know this is red meat for the election on both sides. And the Democrats can turn this into something effective at the polls if they keep the drum beating. The wrinkle is the economy. If the economy remains soggy as it is now, if we go into a recession between now and, say, the second or third quarter of this year, and stay there for the election, then the Democrats have a bigger argument to make. If somehow they can muster all of the people on the left and in the center who support abortion rights, the Democrats have a good chance of not only maintaining the Congress, but increasing seats. If the economy trumps that by being soggy, who knows?
Yeah, Mark, you're the finance guy. Are we headed towards a severe recession before the midterm elections?
Well, I don't think we'll have a recession before the midterms at this point, but I do see us having a recession after the midterms. And it could get to the point to where it feels like a recession before officially it's actually dawned as a recession, if that kind of made sense. But go ahead.
Well, let's get back to the Federalist Society and its influence. Now, the Federalist Society, the way I understand it, was a bunch of law students that got together, formed the Federalist Society, taking the name from the Federalist Papers when there were arguments about how the Constitution should be enacted and should be constructed. And so it was conservative students, and somehow they were able to curry influence with several administrations that and provide these nominees that were eventually confirmed. So, and Brian, that in itself you see as a disturbing element here.
Well, I'll run up the story I told you in one of these previous Gab sessions about Mad Magazine's greatest piece in the early 70s. That was the election between Nixon and McGovern, and there were two pictures of both candidates in the center. It might have been in the centerfold, might have been in the first article. I'm not sure which, but anyway, it was in the Mad Magazine, and it showed Richard Nixon with a clenched fist and George McGovern kind of snarling, and they're both delivering these impassioned pitches to voters. And one of the things that they said that Nixon had coming out of his mouth was, "Vote for me. I'll finish packing the Supreme Court with narrow-minded nebbishes. I'll repeal the rest of the Bill of Rights, and I'll make Indochina look like the bottom of a shake and bake bag." That's not too far off the money.
All right. Now, the other side of the coin is, should the Supreme Court be packed with flaming liberals, the crazy woke people that are so extreme on the other side? And
I'm not saying, no. The answer to that is a quick no. The problem is that the stacking of the court has occurred under Republican administrations, not Democrats. Don't forget, Mitch McConnell wouldn't even bring Merrick Garland up for a vote with more than a year left in Barack Obama's presidency. That's inexcusable. That's not what the framers of the Constitution had in mind.
Well, look at the nominee that's been confirmed already under the Biden administration, Ketanji Jackson Brown, and she is far to the left, and a lot of her writings and utterances over the years show that she's really weighting it way over to the left side. So both sides are doing this. They're bringing in the nominees that fit their political philosophy. So isn't that part of the game of politics? Is it really unfair that the conservatives had their shot, and now with Biden, he's trying to get in as many as possible while he's still in office?
Well, I think what's going to happen is that if you look at some of the justices that have been on the court, Rehnquist, for instance, saying that Roe versus Wade was settled law, that shocked the hell out of me. I never expected him to blurt that out. And the thing that you never know about justices is how they're going to vote in the end. And that's the unknown here.
Yeah, but I mean, both sides are trying to stack it with people that are along their lines. I mean, that's obvious. So what I'm saying is that this is nothing new. So to be outraged because the conservatives got their shots in, and now it's the Democrats' turn, then to me that seems like it's part of the game. I mean, both sides do it. It's not one side shouldn't be blamed more than the other.
Mark?
Well, I was going to, you talked about, that when Garland was up to become a Supreme Court justice and the Senate delayed it, technically, it's the president's job to nominate, but it's the Senate's job to actually approve somebody that they want. And of course, the Senate was majority Republicans, so they actually did their job, even though you may not agree with it. They actually did their job and decided not to carry a vote to someone they decided as a political party was unfit for the position.
Talking about fair treatment, look what they did to Clarence Brown, to Clarence Thomas. I mean, and also Kavanaugh. I mean, they were going back to history and all kinds of charges that were irrelevant to whether he was competent as a justice. I mean, both sides play dirty, quick and dirty on this.
My suspicion is the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearing was the setup for what has occurred since then, for each and every nominee to the court. If you think back to Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, they promised, and so did Neil Gorsuch for that matter, they promised that they would pretty much leave Roe versus Wade alone. In fact, Kavanaugh said that he told Senator Collins, as did Gorsuch, that it was unlikely that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. And here we are. Now, does that mean that you say anything to get confirmed? Does it mean you have a change of heart after you're confirmed? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, that's happened all along. For instance, like with Roberts, he came in as a conservative, but a lot of his decisions now have been nebulous, and some of the decisions have gone to the liberal side. So again, that's nothing new with people who are nominated with a certain philosophy, supposedly, making rulings just opposite that.
But something I'll add to that, this paper that was released, it was a draft going back, I think, to February. I guess the question is, was this something that one of the justices was just kind of playing around with? Did they actually plan on trying to reverse this? And did then somebody get a hold of it thinking this will be great fodder to fire up the election going into the midterms? I just find that very odd.
Oh, it is. I think that there's little doubt that, well, I no, there's little doubt. That's a little bit strong. I will say that it's likely that one of the justices on the left leaked this document. I would bet money on that.
I think it's actually
That's my own opinion.
it's actually a justice who did it, not a clerk.
I think, or if it was done by a clerk, it was sanctioned by one of the justices.
I would agree with that.
I don't think that this came out of the blue.
I would agree with that, because this is such a big deal. If a clerk did this without a justice giving them support to say, I'll take care if you get caught, this would be a career-ending event for anyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you got to remember, all these clerks, their goal is to be a federal judge someday. This right here, it will end their career of ever being a federal judge on a lower court.
If it just
might even end their federal careers for any kind of federal employment. So that's true.
If a justice was behind this and that justice is outed, what should happen to that justice?
Well, let's start with Clarence Thomas and his pillow talk with his wife. Nothing became of that. That's pretty repugnant. I think that's more repugnant than Roe versus Wade.
His pillow talk with his wife. I mean, how relevant is that?
Well, I think it's very relevant, considering he was the only justice who dissented on the January 6th case. You know, come on.
So what you're saying is you can't listen to the opinion of your wife, and if it coincides with your ruling, somehow that invalidates your vote.
Well, are you making the decision based on politics, or are you making the decision based on law?
Do any of them make the decision based on law, or doesn't politics enter into it for all of them?
Well, look, if you have an 8-1 decision, something's fishy in Denmark there.
Well, look what we got so far behind me. You know, the 4 recent appointments. Now, the one on the left, of course, is Jackson, Katanja, and you know, she's now a big liberal. So, you know, Biden is going to try to get in 2 more before his term ends. I don't know how that's going to occur, but you know, look at how they ousted Breyer. You know, how they accelerated his exit in order to get Jackson Brown in.
Mark?
I would agree with that. My understanding, you know, Kristen, you hear everything in the rumor mill, is when Justice Breyer actually was planning on retiring, it was announced before he actually got a chance to. He was actually surprised that the news came out like 2 days before he was going to make the official announcement. So that just kind of irritates me.
Well, you know what? How I see this now, I think there was always politics with the Supreme Court, but it wasn't so obvious. It wasn't so blatant. But now that it's getting so much publicity and it causing so much enragement, you know, does that dilute the influence and respect for the Supreme Court of the United States? Because it's being seen now as just another bunch of political actors rather than as isolated people that are dedicated to the letter of the law rather than politics. In other words, isn't this kind of diluting the respect for the Supreme Court, or at least the image that they used to have?
Well, I think yes. The short answer is yes. But I think that when you look at the politics that both sides have played over the years, it should be of no surprise to you that this kind of toxic environment exists. I don't know if there's any solution to it, just like I don't know if there's any solution to what's going on in the Congress. And the more the country remains polarized and gets more polarized, the more obnoxious these decisions are going to be to one side or the other. It's very predictable. And
both sides have been doing that. Look at Schumer, who went before right in front on the steps of the Supreme Court, calling them out, telling them they better watch out if they keep up these conservative rulings, that they better watch out. I mean, you know, that's like a threat to the Supreme Court justices. So, you know, both sides are getting wild about this. And it's not just the Republicans. The Democrats are pouring it on as well.
Well, yeah, and that's something I wanted to say. You know, if you go back, 20, 30 years ago, Democrat, Republican president, both parties try to do what was in the best interest of the country as a whole. But here in the last 10 to 11 years, now it's about doing what's in the best interest to get your political party reelected.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think they were, I don't necessarily agree that it used to be that they were doing stuff in the best interest of the country. I mean, they were always adhered to their own doctrine and their own political philosophy. And, that they try to engender that as much as they could in different ways. What I'm saying is it was never so obvious, never so intense. And what is that leading to? I mean, already, Congress is disrespected. Everybody sees us as a bunch of self-seeking career politicians on the take. And now it's kind of getting the Supreme Court that halo as well. So I'm generally in American politics, it's more and more division, more and more heated arguments on both sides, more emotion rather than reason. And this is just another step along the way. I mean, I fear for the stability of the country if this keeps up.
Well, look, if you take a look at all the polls, people, without a question, the approval rating for members of Congress is always in the 20s or the teens. It's always very low. Ask the next question. What do you think about your congressman or your senator? Oh, goodness, the numbers shoot right up again. It's always somebody else's ox that's no good, not your own. And that's the problem every American has with legislative representation, not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well.
Here's the Scranton Times. I live near Scranton, and a big headline. Well, it's not showing up, but anyway, it's the big front page, big headline, and they're also mentioning Casey, which it was Roe and Casey. That was a ruling where Casey, and not the current senator, but his father, who was governor, he sued Planned Parenthood to put restrictions on abortion, certain limitations, and that was granted. Again, this is just what I think is ahead now is, more of this turmoil. Look at how quickly you had protesters at the Supreme Court last night, just a few hours after this was leaked. And they came with pre-made signs, So to me, it seems like this is really coordinated behind the scenes.
I think the signs have been made all along because they anticipated that this was going to happen. But you're right, the timing was kind of quick. But you know what? That's not surprising with what has happened with this court on controversial cases up to now. I'm not surprised by that. They're galvanized for a fight. And I think if you think it's, a surprise that they came out in the middle of the night, then maybe you've been sleeping too long.
But again, I mean, Brian, overall, though, despite the politics on each side has a case, each side has some legitimate arguments. Don't you see this as a deterioration now of what had been a fairly stable political system?
Well, look, I think that when either side gets to the point where they say, we have to put our justices on the court to bring about our legislative agenda or our political philosophy, you get into trouble, whether it's to the left or to the right. And heretofore, I think Mark was right. We've had some sort of a centrist bent to the court, except for the last 15 years. And I think he makes a very valid point there that that's all going away now. And who knows where the pendulum is going to end up, whether it's going to swing right and stay there or swing back to the center or swing left. We don't know that. But I think in the meantime, you're going to have a lot more controversy to look at.
How do you feel about Democratic calls to pack the courts or to expand the number of members on the Supreme Court? And, and what they want to do, of course, is bring in the liberal justices. I mean, do you think that's kosher?
No, I think that's stupid. I think 9 is fine.
Well, I mean, there's increasing calls for that. And Biden himself said, I think, first weeks in office that they would study this, I guess, form a committee and right. Study the whether the Supreme Court should be expanded. So right there was a signal that they're tampering with the Supreme Court.
Well, it hasn't been proposed yet. So, Mark, I'll let you pick up from there.
All right, but where does it stop? So let's say you bring 3 more justices under Biden. Then the next Republican president says, "Oh, let's expand the court to 25." I mean, how do you even stop it? And then it just gets into just now it really gets into a war of political parties.
Yeah, no,
I think that's right.
Don't forget FDR. You know, with all the good he did in his attempts to pull us out of the Depression, he tried to pack the Supreme Court, and he was soundly criticized for that with good reason.
Well, not only that, the justices also went after the New Deal. I mean, they were relentless in their opposition to what he did, and he still got it done, no matter what the decision by the court was. And you know, if I think the unknown in FDR's presidency is what would have happened if we didn't have World War II.
Right. Yeah, Mark, you might be able to speak to that. I mean, a lot of people say that FDR's programs, New Deal, wasn't really pulling us out of the Depression with much effect, and it was really the onset of war that did it. Do you agree with that?
Correct. The United States just could not get a footing on pulling itself out of the recession with the depression. No matter how much stimulus you put in from the government, it really required the war to be basically, because you make a product, you make a tank, it gets blown up. Now you've got to create new jobs to rebuild a product that is consistently being destroyed.
Was there anything that FDR could have done differently before the war came to pull us out of the Depression that would have been more effective than his New Deal programs?
Technically, by the time he became president, it had already gotten way too far into it. The problem, you can take the problem all the way back to the 1920s, early 20s, and late 1910s, when the Federal Reserve basically had a very poor monetary policy in place, and that's what really created the Depression. And there really wasn't anything the president could do at that moment. It really required an event outside of politics to fix it.
What about the argument that actually FDR's programs made it worse?
Well, I don't think they made it worse. I don't think. I think that's wishful thinking on the part of people who want to rewrite history. But I think that Mark is right. The seeds were sown for this depression long before the stock market crash in 1929, and one of the things that I always come back to is that some of the people in government in the 20s were totally ignorant of how complex the United States economy was becoming. And I don't think they knew how to handle it, how to bridle it, how to let off when it was time. And many things that could have been done during the 20s to mitigate the effects of a stock market downturn on the size of what we had in 1929 were just thrown by the wayside. Oh, no, that can't happen. Well, it did.
Well, yeah, and one thing I'll add, but my grandmother, she was alive during the Depression, and I'd ask her questions about it once, and I said, "So how'd you survive the 1930s?" And she said, "I really don't know what to tell you about the 1930s because we were already living in a depression for her family in like 1922. But you always hear about the Roaring 20s, how great it was. It was only great for a few people. It wasn't great for everybody."
That's correct.
That's interesting. So there wasn't a ripple effect throughout the country, elevating the strengthening the economy with the stock market going wild before the crash. That didn't generalize to the population.
Well, no, the stock market was basically the only people back then that invested in stocks were your millionaires, which were basically billionaires in today's standards. They were really the only people buying stocks. The average person just didn't have the money in the 20s to actually buy stocks.
Or the savvy.
Yeah.
Or the savvy. That's the whole thing, is that we had that division in the economy, plebes and patricians, and the patricians were going to hang on to that power no matter what came down the pike. And they fought Roosevelt left and right. There was a fellow from Hyde Park who was interviewed for the PBS series on FDR, and he said, the people in Hyde Park thought, what is wrong with Franklin Roosevelt? What did he sniff before he became the president of the United States? They thought he was a traitor to their class.
Yeah.
And there is nothing that could ever rewrite that in their eyes. So it's, you know, that class distinction is really something that died hard, and it's still dying hard in the US. There's a lot of people who want two classes of people again.
But my question would be this: during the Roaring '20s, with the stock market going nuts, did that not increase the number of enterprises, and didn't that translate into more jobs for the general population? It did no effect on the economy?
No.
Nope. It was just money. You know, you had the rich people would sell stock A, then turn around and buy stock B on margin. And it really, there was really no economic growth whatsoever in the 1920s.
Just like trickle-down economics, Larry. You know, it works if you're in the upper crust and you can afford to take risks and reap the rewards, or look at the losses until you can reap the rewards again. But the trickle-down theory of, well, you know, we'll give the entrepreneurs a tax cut, and the extra funds will eventually allow them to create more economic activity to create more jobs. Well, I'm sorry. The only thing that trickles down on the middle class from that sort of stuff is urine. And that's what has always irritated working people about the concept of having fat cats decide their fate. It's been a rub right from the get-go.
All right, we're drifting away from our original topic here. What we're discussing could be our next podcast. But getting back to the Supreme Court now, how do you think this is finally going to play out? Will this intimidate the justices and they're not going to overturn Roe versus Wade, or will it have no effect on them?
Mark?
I think that, you know, but before this became, you know, public behind closed doors, I really think the goal of the Supreme Court was basically say, we're going to push it back to the states, because look how many cases have already come in front of the Supreme Court just in the past 3 months. Texas, Mississippi, Alabama. The Supreme Court's getting tired of hearing the same cases over and over again. I think they want the state governments to do it. And the Supreme Court also wants the power of the people to elect the politicians to actually put the laws in place. So I'm going to say they're probably going to basically push this off again to the side. They just really don't want to awaken a sleeping giant in this situation. And it's just going to drag out. I don't think anything's going to be done this year about it. Cat's out of the bag.
Right?
And it could be. I don't know. We're going to have to see how much political pressure publicly is put on lawmakers first, and see what their reactions are going to be. If you look at the Republicans in the House now, not one lawmaker will vote for abortion rights. We know that already. They've already said it. So that should come as no surprise that you know, the reproductive freedom might be in serious peril here. And if the court decides to uphold this draft, Mark is right. It's going to be the conservative states that prohibit this, and the more liberal states that will continue to provide abortion choices for women. But if that occurs, then you're really going to see a dichotomy in politics. If you think it's bad now, just wait.
That's another thing I want to add is for the midterms, though, whatever the reason behind this, if you bring abortion as the platform for votes, the conservative states, you're going to see a huge turnout to vote conservatives in. You're going to see a huge turnout in blue states to vote in liberals. And then those middle purple states, it's anybody's guess on how that's going to turn out. Those Congress people in those states are sweating it right now because they don't want to go on record at all.
You're right. And I think it's going to be the purple states again, just like the ones that decided 2020, as to whether there's a change in the dynamic of the politic of abortion rights. And, you know, it's anybody's guess as to what's going to happen.
So I guess the bottom line here, as I see it, is that what's going to happen here is the creation of yet more division in this country.
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Oh yeah, and the thing, Larry, if it wasn't this issue, it'd be another issue that would divide the country. It's just, you know, pick the number of the week. That's all it is.
Well, you know, some analysts are saying that despite the emotion current, by the time the midterms roll around, again, it's going to get back to, it's going to reboot back to the top concerns that have been shown in all the recent polls, the economy, inflation, and even immigration. And, abortion may slide down the list of concerns. What do you think about that? Or will this still be a very influential determiner of how people vote? In other words, will it not be such a big issue by the time the midterms run around?
I don't. Both sides are going to rev up everybody. You can see that coming. Democrats are going to seize on this, thinking this is their key to maintaining the majorities they have in the House and the Senate, if not amplifying them. And Republicans are going to say, well, it's just the Democrats trying to preserve, their president and their stature in the Congress, and it's all a red herring issue. It's hard to predict what the result will be, but you can anticipate very easily what the two sides are going to say.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, will the Democrats miscalculate on this, assuming that this will still be a big issue, top of the list of concerns, or will again it go back to inflation and the economy, which is in the top of the list now of concerns in all the polls?
Mark?
Well, when people go vote, economics are always the number one reason why people vote. And I think in this case, those politicians that really don't want to mention anything about inflation or the economy, they need something else to run on, and this could be it.
Well, like Bill Clinton said, it's the economy's stupid. So maybe
that's right.
I'll be again this time. Well, gentlemen, thanks very much for your perspectives on this, and we'll probably be doing more on this. Plus, we'll be doing more later in the week on the economy itself, where it's headed, and also on something I'd like to bite into more is the Disinformation Governance Committee, and how big a threat that is or isn't to free speech in this country. So that's ahead of us. But for now, thanks for being with us, Mark Collingsworth of Severe Global Financial Wealth Management, and Brian Thomas, mostly of the AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C., and me, Larry Sperano. Thanks very much, and thank you all of you out there for bearing with us once again. Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Thanks.